Here I am with this week's Tarot Snapshot. I want to thank everybody for taking the time out of their day to watch this video. This is a longer video than I normally do. This is going to be a roughly 10-minute video. Fair warning, so if you don't have 10 minutes of your life to devote to this, hop off now. So stay with me because these three cards that I'm going to pull for you, for us, hopefully will give us some much needed insight. So allow me to shuffle and tell you what the Tarot Snapshot is. It's a 3-card reading that shows us who we are in the moment, what vexes and perplexes us, what challenges us, what heals and reveals, what is the guidance and wisdom that we need. Now, I'm a big believer that most of the guidance and wisdom that we need can come from within. This morning, I did a little video about why it's so difficult for us to be able to care for ourselves. Why is it difficult for us to prioritize our own health and well-being? Some of us are good at it, and somebody got on there and was like, well, I just don't know how to. And I appreciate that because most of us aren't taught how to care for ourselves. But if we tap into the blueprint that is our spirit, we know how to care for the people that we love, generally speaking. So, with that being said, the card that represents us all this week is the Emperor. Okay. This card, and this is so fascinating to me that this would come up for what I was just talking about. This card is, I want you to think of like the ideal dad energy. Now, in this world, we're familiar with the idea of toxic masculinity or hyper masculinity. If something exists, so won't the worst version of it. There is hyper and toxic femininity, just by the very nature of it being a thing. There's also divine femininity, the divine feminine. And if the divine feminine exists, so doesn't the divine masculine exist. So the Emperor card in tarot does speak to authority and structure and holding ourselves accountable. But here's the question that I have to ask you. What is adulting but successfully self-parenting? Now, do you have kids? If you have kids, are you a jerk to them? Do you yell at them? Do you beat them up? I'm going to probably assume that you don't. This is the card that is encouraging us to parent ourselves with firmness, absolutely, but with a loving hand. With a loving hand. So this is Santa Claus, and not just because of the beard, but think of what Santa Claus represents as an archetype, that person who is the giver, the provider, the protector. Now, regardless of our sexuality or our gender, the Emperor, the masculine energy that this represents, lives in us all, as does femininity, the capacity to nurture and nourish, and the capacity to hold one accountable. Now, I really like that idea of adulting being successfully self-parenting us. And I have goals. I have a certain amount of freedom because I am self-employed. I have to be able to hold myself accountable, but I'm never going to be able to accomplish what I want or achieve the peace that is my birthright by being a jerk to me. Am I really going to get my son to hear me by being a jerk to him? Or am I going to make him do whatever he was doing in the opposite direction? If I yell and scream at him, most likely he's going to dig his heels in and do the thing that I was encouraging him not to do twice as hard and in the opposite direction. So remember that we all have that divine masculine part of us. And what is the ideal masculine energy? This is something for us to contemplate, for us to ponder, because I think that we do live in a world of, and I don't want to get on a soapbox about the patriarchy, but we do live in a world where there is a great degree of hyper or toxic masculinity, and that can cause us to, make assumptions based on men or masculinity in general. What is ideal masculinity to us? Now, with that being said, the card that vexes and perplexes us is What? I couldn't write this. The Empress. Okay. So here we are, being rigid and structured and maybe a little bit harsh on us. You know, if we're beating ourselves up too much, then we are that hyper or toxic negativity, that masculinity, the negative form of this, or being evil Santa, if you will. And if this is the card that vexes and perplexes us, the fact that we don't know how to nourish ourselves, that's quite blatant. It's right on the nose. I also want to point out, look at the difference in how they're sitting. So the Emperor here is on this throne, rigid, hard, cold. But look at the Empress. Sure, she's on that same kind of throne, but look at the pillows that she has. That's because she knows how to take care of herself. She understands that heavy is the head that wears the crown, and she's not pulling any of that John Wayne bullshit, that tough guy act. I'm a rugged individual and I don't need to care for myself. These are two pairs. Think the yin-yang symbol. That's what these two represent. Now, we have a hard time nurturing ourselves. We have a hard time mothering ourselves. Some of us have harsh, cruel, narcissistic mothers. Some of us have loving, giving, caring, nurturing mothers. But I think that the blueprint for nurturing exists within us all, regardless of how we were raised or how we were programmed. So I want to encourage you, before we even get to the next card, to think about how you would parent and nurture your loved ones, your pets, your plants, your career, your home, and think about bringing that same energy to you. Now, that person, that friend of mine who was on that post this morning going, I don't believe I deserve it. I have a really hard time doing that. That's all valid. I'm not discounting that. I do want to encourage that person to know that they have that blueprint within them. That means that they have immediate access to that wisdom on the inside of them. Now, let's take a look at the card that heals and reveals. That card would be the Page of Swords. All right. So the swords in tarot represent the mind. And what the page has taught me, and especially this card has taught me, this is a person just learning how to use the sword. Think about what a page is to a knight, the person in training. And there's a lot of, heaviness and training, and there's a lot of wind blowing around. The sword represents the mind in tarot, and I love that analogy because if we don't use a sword with skill and grace, we hurt ourselves or the people around us. If we use a sword with skill and grace, we'll accomplish its purpose. We'll keep ourselves protected. And perhaps that's what our mind should be doing, protecting ourselves, protecting us from the things on the outside of us, the wind that blows around. We're not taught to use our mind with skill and grace, most often because the people that raise us don't know how to do it themselves. We're not taught these things in public education. Most often we're figuring it out through trial and error. And through trial and error, we are going to hurt ourselves and the people around us. But the Page of Swords encourages us to learn how to use our mind. Now, if we were raised by people who did not know how to nurture us, or if we were raised by people who were too rigid and structured, there's the chance that we will most often repeat those patterns and those lessons. I was raised by really hardcore New England farming stock. My parents, as much as they loved, provided, and protected me, they weren't great at giving me the words of encouragement or the positive affirmation that I needed. That's no shade thrown to them. I just have to understand that my parents were a certain set of individuals. They impacted me in a certain set of ways, and I have to confront that codependent, people-pleasing part of me that looked for that approval in others, that looked for that validation in others. It's interesting that the only place that we can find validation and completion is in us. That's the only place. That's the only place. We can't get validation and approval from anybody outside of us. Because if we get our validation and approval from those outside of us can take it away. And that's not what we're here for. We're here to know ourselves and make the most of our lives in this complicated world.